I kind of look at Bitcoin as almost analogous to Ephesians 6 with the armor of God. And we have to put on that armor and project that into a world that wants to seek and destroy us. Not just spiritually, but physically in terms of our time and energy. And so by being able to project that power into the world, spiritually and then also digitally through cyberspace, really gives us a powerful tool that humanity's never had before to resist the state and to reclaim to put God back into the place that he should have in our lives.
I wrote the Bible and Bitcoin for you, Bible-believing Christian, and in it I lay out the biblical basis for what money is, why our current fiat monetary system is ungodly, and how Bitcoin is the best and most viable, biblically compliant replacement for government fiat money. There's even a small group study guide in the back with additional resources to study with your church small group. Get it on Amazon or pay with Bitcoin at thebibleandbitcoin.com for a discount. Welcome to another episode of the Bible and Bitcoin podcast. I am your host, Alan Armstrong, aka Pastor Coin, and on today's episode I have Twitter user Doctareed. Welcome to the show, sir. Thank you for coming.
Good to have you. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, and we are exploring the intersection of Christianity and Bitcoin, if you haven't caught on yet by the title of the podcast and all the episodes. But today we're doing something a little different. Usually we'll talk about a current event or some kind of a subject related to Bitcoin or the Bible or both. But today I want to explore with our first guest in this sort of new series, if you will, the intersection of Christianity and Bitcoin in terms of Bitcoin being and I want to be careful with how I say this, being the catalyst or the rabbit hole which people go down that somehow ends at Christianity, because I've seen this a lot on Twitter with people who are newer Christians after coming to Bitcoin. Now, you were a Christian before Bitcoin,
Yes.
but that's okay because, as was I. But I really want to explore this idea of why Bitcoin specifically seems to be that. I'm not sure what word to use because I've been criticized online for saying, oh, the Bitcoin rabbit hole has led you to Christ. And people are like, no, the Holy Spirit leads you to Christ. Like, yeah, obviously I get that, but God uses different things to bring people and to reveal the truth of Jesus Christ to them. And one of those things seems to be Bitcoin for a good chunk of people online that I've seen. And it's one of these sort of mysteries in my mind. I'm going, how in the world, why in the world you would not expect that? You would expect maybe, a tragedy in your life and you start asking questions, or a birth of a child and you go, wow, the miracle of life, maybe there is a God. Things like this tend to open people's minds, but Bitcoin, very, very, very strange. So I want to ask you, what initially drew you to Bitcoin?
Well, let me kind of give a little bit about my background, kind of a little bit of my history, and it kind of all ties in. I grew up in the church. My father was a kind of a part-time minister of music for, 30 years. My parents were primarily educators. Grew up in a very rural area, a lot of blue collar folks, a very traditional Southern Baptist church, for, folks to whom that means something. Grew up really with Southern values, very traditional family values. So, that's kind of the basics of my background. I spent, church was the center of culture in my community. My parents were educators, but I was always kind of a socially awkward guy. Imagine that, being a Bitcoiner. And so, church was where all of my friends were. It's where all of my social activities were. It's where everything, all of the relationships sprung from. That I think really, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I think we've gotten away from that. And I think that's part of the problem with where we are in society. But although I connected with church on a physical level, I didn't connect here. That's kind of one of the the struggles that a lot of people in the church have is that, the church is really good about making a physical, a mental, or even an emotional connection. But the heartfelt connection, the actual relationship with Christ, unfortunately, is missing for a lot of people, and it was missing for me too. Um, it was not until my early 20s, 2003, when I actually accepted the Lord. And I think for me, what connected with is I had met my girlfriend, fiance, who was going to be my wife at the time. I had moved away from, a lot of that traditional environment that I'd grown up in. And so it was, that time in your life where you really have to lean back and question what you've learned and really put that to use. And so, that for me was pivotal as far as, moving from that, putting away those childish things and becoming an adult. And so, that to me was the point at which I realized, hey, wait a minute, no, this Jesus thing has to be real. Otherwise I cannot move forward. And my career path from there, I've been at the time I was in grad school, I've been a pharmacist for almost 20 years. And so kind of been serving in a lot of different roles and in a lot of different communities. And I think for me, really what drove me to Bitcoin, really for me, I was somebody who struggled with debt. I struggled with materialism, struggled to prioritize my family in the way that I should have. So, a lot of the trappings that we speak of the world today, where it pulls all of our time and things away from godly priorities that we should have, I struggle with just like anybody else did. With relationships, with time, with money, with everything. The world tries to pull us away from all of that because it wants to steal and rob us of that value and that priority and time that God commands us to put forth. I think really what drove me to Bitcoin in the end was it kind of started in 2020. Obviously with a lot of the events of 2020, whether it was a lot of whether it was COVID, whether it was elections, whether it was a lot of other factors that played in the world, that was kind of a pivotal point for a lot of people. And that's what really drove me to question a lot of things. Not only where my faith was at and where it was going, where my relationship with my family was at, where my career was at. And so that was the pivotal point for me of, really searching out to kind of find, what the source of truth was. Obviously, we know the Word of God is truth. But, when the world goes crazy, sometimes, it requires a lot of faith and it requires a lot of searching to connect, with what God is doing in your life, what God's doing in the world, with, what you're going through in that particular moment in time. And for me, I think really my orange pill story, if you will, is I can only describe it as an act of God because there's really no other explanation for it. I didn't have anybody in my life that came to me. I didn't have a book that was dropped in my lap. I didn't, for me, it really was hearing people dissing it. I remember very vividly, doing what I used to do and having the TV on after the election. A random clip of Warren Buffett popping up and him just talking badly about it. Rat poison, those kind of things. And so I'm a guy that I hear things like that and I want to go, well, why would somebody say that? That's kind of a weird thing to say.
Right.
And I, at the same time, I'm kind of the research guy. So if I hear something, I like to go, oh yeah, well, let me validate that. Let me check that out and just move on with life. So that was my, I'm like, all right, let me take an hour or two, just go check some things out, be a good little normie and validate my cognitive bias and, about what he's saying and move on,
Yeah.
So, what does everybody do when they want to research something? They go to Google, it's what everybody does. And as biased as that platform is, you would not believe what popped up in my search. One of the first items that popped up was...
Hold on. What did you search specifically? Do you remember what the search
I
was?
literally searched. I literally just said, what is Bitcoin and why? I think I said, what is Bitcoin and why does it matter?
Okay.
And what popped up literally was Breed, Love, and Sailor. That was one of the first things that popped up. Yeah, I mean,
that's good.
Yeah, exactly. Hardcore content, and literally dove into the hornet's nest and just started right down that pathway. And within about probably 2 to 3 months of that, it really spurred a hunger for content.
Mm.
Obviously the learning stemmed from there. And within about, 2 to 3 months, February of 2021, actually Valentine's Day, I bought my first Bitcoin because I really wanted to understand this on a conceptual level before I started putting things into it. And I think that's a good principle of wisdom, especially, we don't want to go pouring our time and energy into something without, putting some study into it.
Yes.
I mean, that's Second Timothy, if we want to apply it to the secular world there. And so, for me, it was all about, taking elements of elements of the Bible, whether it be stewardship, whether it be honesty, whether it be transparency, whether it be, whether it be having an anarchic model of society, whether it be, trying to reinforce a lot of those godly principles is what really strengthened my conviction there. So kind of my finding Bitcoin story really is serendipitous, and I kind of give, credit to the Lord for pointing me in that direction.
When you started down the rabbit hole, my experience was I wanted to tell a lot of people about this. I don't know if that's just my personality or what, but what was your experience like when you were discovering these principles and Bitcoin? And I mean, it can be really exciting. It's very new. It's very fresh, refreshing. Did you keep it to yourself at first, or were you just blasting it on the hilltop? And if you were blasting it on the hilltop, what was the reaction like from fellow Christians?
Well, I think everybody kind of goes through, especially, everybody goes through that Bitcoin evangelism phase, where they want to orange pill the world. And, especially being a Christian, that kind of compounds that, because obviously obviously you think about, the Great Commission. And so, go forth and make disciples of all nations. Well, here we are with this other piece to this puzzle that connects in Christian values. And so your mind's exploding, when you're thinking about it in that context. And I did that. I went out and tried to orange pill the family, orange pill the friends, orange pill the church. Here we are, 4.5 years later. I orange pilled a friend within a couple of months, and he and I are pretty close as far as talking about things. But it took a couple of years with my parents. In fact, I think I just finally, they finally capitulated here a couple of months ago. My mother-in-law, the same, who lives with us. So. But to be honest with you, my friends, my colleagues at work, my church, it's still crickets. I've had those discussions, at least on a surface level, trying to connect, biblical values to kind of pique the interest, if you will. But, still no movement. And, I think that although I can understand it from a normie mindset, I think that there's some dangers there, that the church is really missing out on a powerful tool here.
Okay, I have to ask you because you mentioned your mother-in-law. My mother-in-law works at a bank, and she's not really been hostile to Bitcoin. She's kind of just been observing and whatever through it all. And she finally capitulated as well and bought some, but it was like near the top in December. And I thought, oh man, this is a local top signal. We're going down from here. She finally bought. Did your mother-in-law buy around that time too?
My mother-in-law, sorry for the cheesiness of the message. She's one of the godly Proverbs 31 women in my life. So I'm very thankful for her. And she actually lives with my wife and I here. She came in, I gave her a copy of your book, The Bible and Bitcoin, or Bitcoin and the Bible. And, she connects everything really back to biblical values, a very diligent lady. So when she read that, she actually, I said, take your time, come to me with questions. I'll be happy to help you.
Hmm.
And she came to me about a month or two later and says, I don't fully understand this and I don't really know that I need to, but I feel like I need to own some because I feel like it's honoring to the Lord. And I
Hmm.
said, okay. And so, whenever she has the ability to, she'll throw some money my way and says, hey, can I buy more Bitcoin? Absolutely. I'll take care of it for you.
That's good.
So,
That's good.
and it's a similar story with my parents. My dad came to me last December, kind of what you said with that local top signal. And they got started as well. So it's kind of given me the opportunity to become kind of a custodian for the family.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, I knew that was going to happen in my case. And surprisingly, she's been very cool about it and doesn't really care about the drop. So that's good. I've orange pilled a few people in December, and I almost feel like, but I warn them. Whenever I orange pill someone, I warn them. I say, look, um, this thing might go down 30, 40, 50% in the near term. If you're not willing and you can't stomach that, don't do it.
I,
And
I I've told folks, I said, if you're not willing to tuck it away for 4 or 5 years, then this is not for you.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that's worked out. I don't recommend people being, too hyper bullish and promising the world to people, because what ends up happening is we have a drawdown, and it's not good. But anyways, glad to hear that my book was helpful, that at least got the message through to her that this is something that is honoring to God. And so I'm really, really pleased with that. So thanks for sharing that. It's a great
Kind of
encouragement.
working on some elders on my church too. I've handed out a couple of copies there as well. So I think that I had a good long conversation with one of our elders a couple of weeks ago. He kind of knows he needs to do it, so it's just kind of spurning him to do that. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Let's talk a little bit about the details of these biblical principles aligning with Bitcoin. So how do you see the I guess the ethos of Bitcoin, or the different characteristics of Bitcoin, aligning with Christian ethics, principles, morals, etc., etc.?
Well, I think that there's a lot of different scripture there that kind of we can bring into this discussion that that kind of paints some that Bitcoin has attributes that are similar to Christianity. I think ultimately Bitcoin is a source of truth. It's a record of truth, and obviously that's what the Bible is. Bitcoin being a verifiable record of truth, the Bible being a historically verifiable record of truth in the same.
Mhm.
John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Bitcoin, we kind of think about, Bitcoin is the math, the truth, and the code.
Mm.
So we've got, different attributes that are there that align with biblical principles. Bitcoin is proof of truth, or proof of real, as I've come to say. Whereas the Bible is
Hold
evidence
on a minute.
of
Can
truth and
you
evidence of real.
can you build on that? I like that. I've never heard that. Truth of real. Explain why
Well,
you use that term.
it's it's proof of truth or proof of
Proof of
real.
truth. Sorry, yeah.
Okay, so when we say that, what is real is what is verifiable. Obviously, in Bitcoin, everybody says don't trust, verify. Okay,
Yeah.
and so how do you do that? You can go and verify what has been done historically at any point in Bitcoin, and you have instant verification that says this is truth, this is real. Okay,
Okay.
so when we say proof of real, we say that it's immutable truth that cannot be argued with. Okay, and it is real because it's been manifested in the past and it's still manifested in the present. It wasn't real then, it is real now, and it will always be real because it was done at some point in the past. So
Hmm.
you have that eternal, I'll go ahead and say it, eternal record of what was done in the past. So, proof of truth, proof of real is kind of the term that I use.
Is
The
there?
Bible,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
well, I was going to say, the Bible is analogous to that. It is evidence of truth and proof of truth in terms of what it's doing now in the lives of people. Okay,
Hmm.
uh, you know, think of Hebrews chapter 11. Faith is the and what it talks about faith. And
Yeah.
so that gives you that analogy there, and the Bible being an accurate historical record, and then being evidence of a historical record in the way that it's changing people's lives.
Is there my mind went to this analogy where, Moses goes on to the mountain and God gives him the commandments, and it says he inscribes the commandments on the stone with his finger, with the finger of God, and so forth. And that becomes a sort of, like the source of truth, God,
Mhm.
is inscribing on stone objective, true realities,
Yes,
uh, his
you know
law.
the
And
Bitcoin
is
Genesis, or
Bitcoin
the biblical Genesis block, if you will.
yeah, that's good. Is this analogous to Bitcoin in terms of obviously Bitcoin is not inscribing in stone moral truths? Oh, I guess in a sense you could say it is. It's not like a list of commandments though, but is this a similar principle where we have math, which is the language of truth, being inscribed onto a digital, canvas, if you will, that cannot be changed? I mean, it's objectively, mathematically true, proof of real. Is this
Yeah,
sort
you
of the
you go
idea you're
back.
going for?
It's John 14:6. Okay, I am the way. Well, what is the way for Bitcoin? Mathematics, cryptography.
Hmm.
Okay, the truth. The truth is the truth. That is the immutability of the blockchain. And the life. The life that it does that is the code that's written to maintain that. Okay, so you have those three elements there, and so that's a perfect linkage between how Bitcoin and Christianity can share very similar attributes to each other, and that's another connection to kind of this marriage of how Bitcoiners find Christ and how basically Christians can deepen their faith.
So expand on that a little bit. Is this why, or at least one reason why you see people going to Bitcoin, being mesmerized by Bitcoin, having sort of almost a spiritual encounter with this Bitcoin thing, and then ending up at Christ?
Well, remember, as humans, we are designed by our creator to search for truth. Okay. And so people find that truth through different ways and in different fashions. And ultimately, some people arise at different truths. Okay. You and I are both very keenly aware of that. Ultimately, God is my authority, and Bitcoin is a tool that can reinforce who he is, and that also can change the world away from a lot of the man-made problems that we've had, and change us into more of a Christ-like focus, which removes a lot of the man-made obstacles that we've been struggling with the last few, for since time began. To be honest with you.
So why just give me your take then. Why, or expand a bit on it because I want to know a little bit deeper. Why are so many Bitcoiners coming to Christ? Is it because they found one objective truth and then they just can't help but keep seeking? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. I mean, I think that Bitcoin is a tool that can point to Christ, okay? Because once you discover what immutable truth is in the economic sense, and in the sense of sharing communication and information, then it becomes okay, what does truth look like outside of that? There was the question, Robert Breedlove said, what is money is going to be the most consequential question of our time.
Hmm.
Yes, but what other questions does that lead to? It leads to what's the truth in the world around me? What's
Hmm.
truthful in my relationships? What's the meaning of life? What's the meaning, why am I here? What's my purpose? So it drives people who are oftentimes distracted by the insanity of clown world. It
Hmm.
drives us to really look and answer those hard questions, which not everybody is willing to sit there and answer and examine.
Yeah, I feel like that question, what is money, is presupposing a lot of other things that need to be dealt with first.
Exactly.
You
And
can't really start with money. You got to go a lot deeper first before you get
And
there.
from a Christian perspective, if you examine even just that basic premise, then you have to go into, so many different scriptures, look at, value. They look at time. They look at effort. They look at, who and what you're serving. They look at, where does the money come from? There's so many questions there that invokes that the Bible very clearly answers. And the problem is that, a lot of Christians, even a lot of churches, are completely missing the messages behind what those scriptures are teaching.
Yes, yes. Yeah. And it's tragic because there's so much depth and so much practical knowledge in the Bible for us today when we're dealing with this. It's no mistake that when Jesus is talking about money, he's always connecting it with, who are you serving? Right? He says you cannot serve both God
Matthew
and
chapter
money.
6. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and when he's talking with the Pharisees about taxes, it's the same thing. People read that and they go, "Well, Jesus is telling us to pay taxes." Well, you missed the main point. Right? Jesus didn't bring it up. It wasn't Jesus that went to the Pharisees and asked, "Hey, what do you think about taxes?" It was the Pharisees coming to him and saying, "Is it lawful for us to pay taxes?" And Jesus brings it back to really that fundamental principle. What he was saying to them is, who are you serving? Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. What he's trying to communicate to them is, by you even asking this question, you've missed the point of existence. You don't start with money, because then you end up in idolatry, serving man. You have to start with God, and from there build out, and only then can you, I believe, answer the question, what is money, with any meaningful truth.
I've always viewed that interaction between Jesus and the Pharisees there in that reference. Jesus always knew that he was being trapped, because that's really what the Pharisees did. They were trying to trap him in catch-22s. So I kind of envision Jesus almost giving a sarcastic response. When they ask him, is it lawful to pay the tax? And he says, whose face is on the denarius?
He actually calls them hypocrites first.
Yes, exactly. And so he's saying, give to Caesar what's Caesar. I don't really care.
Yeah.
Render to God which is God's, and that's the point. If you think about in the historical context, up until 2009, all money was state issued. It was government issued. And so, Jesus doing what he did, and in full compliance with 1 Samuel chapter 8, was anarchic in the way that he answered that question. It doesn't matter what the state asks you to do. Money is not the object here. The object is your soul and your devotion, to Christ. That's what he was hitting on there.
Exactly. And when we understand that truth fundamentally, then we can start talking about money, because then we're in the right framework. Then we're working within the right biblical, framework. I think is the best way to say it. Because if you're not in that frame, then you're outside the frame with the Pharisees, and that's a status mind. And it's no coincidence, I believe, that when Jesus was on trial, the Pharisees cried out, "We have no king but Caesar." Because remember when Pilate asks, "Should I crucify your king?" And they say, "No, we have no king but Caesar." It's like, well, no, duh, you have no king but Caesar. And that's exactly what Jesus was telling them back in, I think, Matthew 22, when he was talking about, the coin and so forth. He was just exposing, no, you guys, your king is Caesar, so you pay unto your king what is his. The real issue is you need to make God your king. And you haven't made God your king, and so you're a hypocrite, so pay unto your king what is his.
The beauty of that is that all of that was prophesied.
Right.
That he would be rejected by his own, and I think that's even more of a portrait of the amazing redemption story that is. But no, you're right. I mean, it's. You have so many congruencies in the Bible. We mentioned Matthew 6 a little bit ago. I mentioned 1 Samuel chapter 8. And even if you take it even to, Matthew 22, where Jesus issues his two great commandments. What were his two great commandments? Love the Lord your God yourself with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Mm-hmm. Nowhere is surrendering authority and rendering respect to the state in there. Okay.
Right.
And so, our duty as Christians is to love God, to take care of our community, and to keep and to make sure that we maintain the integrity of the church being the cultural center and Christ being the cultural center of our lives. Okay.
Right.
The state is nowhere in that equation. Okay. And that's kind of one of the things that's concerned me about the modern day church, is that, we had several hundred years ago, Martin Luther nailed the theses to the wall. Boom. We kind of consider that the separation of churches and state and kind of the differentiation of Protestantism. But here especially in the 20th century, we had separation of church and state only for the church to be rejoined to the state through perverse incentives like 501c3s. I'm not dissing the church for being tax exempt, but the problem is that weakens the message and the strength of the church.
Yeah, it shouldn't have to be tax exempt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's domesticated us. It's turned
Yeah.
us into, to where we are, propaganda centers for the state. So many churches are, doing patriotic things. Not that that's bad, but our focus should be on God and people, not on what the state wants to do for us. And so it's focused on, it's what's led the church to focus more on like social engagement and becoming what I call Sunday social clubs, rather than being good Bereans and just teaching the word.
Yeah. Whenever people bring up the tax stuff and they say, "Oh well, churches should pay taxes and this tax exempt," and my response is always, "I think everyone should be tax exempt."
Yeah, I mean that's design after all.
I don't think the tax exemption's the problem. I just think it's too narrow. Let's expand tax exemption to all people, all businesses, all organizations. Taking it away from the church is just kind of a step backwards. We want to expand this exemption out to all people, but churches aren't really talking about this. Is why I wrote my other book, Render to God, about taxes, because I think it's so important to have this conversation, because the church, at least the churches in Protestantism, I'm not sure about Catholicism or Orthodoxy, what their views are of this, but I know in the Protestant circles, it's so statist. It's so, I mean, going to, before I had my own church, the message was always taxes are good. We should be good citizens and pay them. And there was never any dealing with, well, hold on a minute. What if the taxes we're paying are being used for explicitly ungodly means, abortion, for example. And I don't know in the States, but I know in Canada, abortions are totally 100% state funded. And
Yep.
so when we pay our taxes, we are actually contributing to abortions.
The wide variety is Planned Parenthood here in the States, and it's similar. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We're also contributing to sex change operations in Canada with our tax dollars and things, and just a whole, legion of other wicked things. And so how do you answer the question if you're a pastor and a congregant comes to you and says, "Hey, pastor, you just told me to pay my taxes and be a good citizen and this and this." But they're killing babies with that money. They're mutilating children with that money. Is this something we should at least speak out against? How do we think biblically about this issue? And again, it goes back to the initial "what is money" question. If you don't have a biblical foundation to rest that question upon, it's just confusion.
Because then you look for an arbitrary source of truth. Yes. And that's where I think that if you look at it, even from the perspective of Bitcoin, Bitcoin points to the perverse incentives that something like that is. Because, let's face it, a church that has a fiat-minded mentality, okay, I would argue that is a statist mentality.
Yep.
And that leads to all sorts of a snowball effect of sinful behavior. Okay, I mean, and it's been a slow fade. Let's be honest. You don't have churches out there that are doing overtly what we would consider to be overtly, ungodly things, for the most part. But underneath the surface, you have things that are questionable, whether it be, misuse of funds, whether it be, God forbid, sexual abuse in the church.
Mhm.
Divorce in the church is ridiculous. So
Yeah,
we've
that's a big
lost
one.
compass. We've lost those family values. And kind of my point there is that the cozy incentives of fiat money have domesticated us into the sense to where we think we're doing what God wants us to do when we're really doing nothing more than glorifying the state because we want their approval. And that's a serious problem.
This manifested itself most evidently during COVID lockdown times, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That period of time really exposed one of the most glaring issues amongst Christian leadership that was sort of like you said, maybe veiled or undercover a bit, underneath the surface, if you will. It brought it to the surface because I don't know what your area ratio was, but in my area, in my county at least, I know of only three churches, one, two, three churches, who did not uh, uh, comply with the orders. My church, another larger one in the city, and like I think it was a Mennonite or Amish or something church out in the county, not in the city. Everyone else shut down. And as a matter of fact, this is an interesting point. In Canada, we had a thing called the what was it called? The salary reimburse something about uh, topping up organizations and companies for salaries. It was like a government benefit, right? So you close down your business, we'll give you X amount of dollars for each employee so you can keep paying them whatever, it was. Now,
So they
you have
bribed you to be compliant.
pretty much it was free money for businesses so that, they'll close down and employees still have some pay,
We
right?
had the Paycheck Protection Program here in the States trying to do
Yeah.
the same.
Something similar, probably, yeah. So, but in Canada, you could actually go on a website and type in the business or the charity name, and it'll show you if they received this benefit. It was
Mm-hmm.
public, right?
Mm-hmm.
I typed in several churches in my city that I knew, and they were all closed. And each and every one of them had that little green check mark. They took the money, they closed down. This is the fiat incentive on the church on full display for everyone. In the three churches that didn't close down, we didn't take no money, despite the fact that we could have really used the money. We're a small church. We don't have a lot of money to begin with. And I was tempted. I'm not going to lie. I was tempted. I remember my wife said to me, hey, they have this thing. They'll give you like $2,000 a month or whatever for each employee. And I thought, oh, that's nice. But then I stopped myself. I said, wait a minute. I don't trust this. This seems a bit too greasy. And so I said, no, we're not going to take it. We're gonna just trust God through this process.
If you sacrifice the message of the gospel in favor of something that can be printed ad infinitum, you will have to answer to God for that. And as a pastor, that's a very precarious position to be in. But for those pastors that did follow that wisdom and stayed open, then that's ultimately what the gospel expects a leader to do. I know for ours, we're in a large military area.
Mm.
And so our church met online. They said, you can come if you want. We're not going to, force people to. We had some of our, military personnel that were involved in worship and actually in the service at the time. So they kind of had to exercise some discernment. But no, I mean, we continue to meet, continue to do services. And I think that it really our pastors really used a lot of wisdom there, and did not just blanket encourage people stay home, live in fear, and
Yeah.
make sure you keep the TV on so we know what's happening.
No, it's crazy. There's stuff going on over here was nuts. You had pastors going up there saying, you know, pray and then talk to your doctor, and it's like, oh my gosh, dude, like what is even going on here? It was just so widespread, and that was a big eye opener to me, because I was down the Bitcoin rabbit hole already, and I'm seeing this, and I'm realizing the fiat money is such a big problem. No one is seeing this. They're not seeing this problem of capitulating to the state in this way, as having one of the one of the reasons being fiat money. There's other reasons people are throwing out, and I'm saying, no, guys, like, the money's a big problem here. If they couldn't just print the money, then this wouldn't even be a conversation right now.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
The world would just be going on as it always does. But because they have this money printer, because they have this weapon at their disposal, they can tell you, shut down everything you're doing, live, lock yourself in your house. Here's a bunch of money. Obey, or we're going to throw you in jail.
Yeah, I mean, so essentially what we did is we proved who is psyopable, or who can be bribed. I think that, and the weakness, unfortunately, that not just churches but Christians as individually displayed, really was, in the eyes of the gospel, it's frankly embarrassing. And because we are called to be held to a higher standard, not just as Christians, not just as men being the leaders of our household, but also as Bitcoiners. We are, it's don't trust, verify. So if you are changing your life according to what the big TV box tells you to, then I'm sad to say, you're not going to make it.
COVID, I think, was the first pandemic, air quotes for those listening, where the church actually ran away from the sick and not towards the sick. And I read that in a book. I forgot who released this book right at the beginning of this whole thing. But it was sort of a history of different pandemics and the church's reaction. And every single one of them, you've seen the church rushing into the hospitals, into the sick areas to help the sick, opening their doors for the sick. But this was the first one where we actually did the opposite. And I think that's very, very telling.
Yeah, I mean, 1 Corinthians 15:58. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord.
Mm.
What happened?
Yeah.
And we're going to, and they'll have to answer for that. God will not hold them blameless for that.
Yeah. So, one last question here for you, and I think it's helpful. It will be helpful for people listening. If there's a person who is in the Bitcoin rabbit hole, hardcore Bitcoin, they're flirting with Christianity, they're looking at Christianity, they're sympathetic to it, but they haven't yet been able to cross that line and say, yep, I'm in 100%, Jesus is Lord, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to think about this, is that Bitcoin is an ultimate record, is the proof of real for where we are at, okay? But as we've shown, really the only two scarce things in the universe are our time, and then there's only 21 million Bitcoin, okay? I know there's the old fiat world mentality that the only things that are certain are death and taxes. No, we're going to take this positive. There's 21 million Bitcoin, and I'm only here for so long, okay?
Yeah.
And so, how do we put ourselves into the eternal blockchain and make ourselves immutable, okay? Mm-hmm. Because our soul, the part of us that God breathed that life into us, okay? So we can connect to all of these things in the world. But when we die, that connection breaks. It's over. It's gone, okay? Well, why would we not want to secure ourselves for that point, okay? So, but here's the beauty of the gospel is that between when you have a relationship with Christ, okay, that is your eternal wallet, if you will. You've got that private key that only you and God know. You have an opportunity to connect with the absolute 100% creator of the universe. Not only that, have a personal relationship with him that you can talk anytime you want. Okay? That's to give the Bitcoiner analogy, that would be you being able to text Satoshi and talk with him anytime you wanted to. That would be amazing from a Bitcoiner's perspective, the wealth of knowledge and information that you could share there. Christianity offers that. It's a gift. We can't do anything to accept it. It's literally given to you and presented to you. Okay? And the fact that we can have that, we can be a part of that without having to have any, precondition. In fact, literally, we can't precondition ourselves. We don't have to necessarily, you can't buy a spiritual hardware wallet. You can't, buy spiritual, currency and store it. Jesus just says, come. That's it. That's the message. And from a Bitcoiner, Bitcoin is kind of the Christians' Martin Luther moment. This is our opportunity to, cull out the lukewarm, as Jesus said, to empower, really growing his kingdom by avoiding all of those cozy entrapments of fiat money that we went into. We can reclaim kind of that position that we are called to have as the social, cultural, and, civil governance center, and our responsibility for administrating social justice. Here we are, the church is supposed to be the center for charity and missions, for all of these things in the community. And Bitcoin really empowers the church to reclaim that, to move away from the domesticated perversion that the church has become, to reclaim a lot of that anarchic position that God calls us to be in, really to serve him and to serve each other.
Right. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Correct. Not ours.
Yeah. And I think Bitcoin aligns with that prayer. And when I pray that prayer, often I find myself praying, I don't pray for Bitcoin. It's computer software. That's ridiculous. But I pray for the success of Bitcoin, that the ideals of Bitcoin would, blanket the whole world so that people would have a free and fair money, and so that there would be no corruption in the money any longer. And so when I pray, your kingdom come, your will be done, I believe Bitcoin's ethos aligns with that. And it's
Agreed.
It's why I'm a Bitcoiner is because I'm a Christian.
Yeah, agreed. I think that, as the church, we have to take power back. I think that Bitcoin gives you the ability to project power into the real world. I kind of look at Bitcoin as almost analogous to Ephesians 6 with the armor of God. Mm-hmm. And we have to put on that armor and project that into a world that wants to seek and destroy us. Not just spiritually, but physically in terms of our time and energy. And so by being able to project that power into the world, spiritually and then also digitally through cyberspace, really gives us a powerful tool that humanity's never had before to resist the state and to reclaim to put God back into the place that he should have in our lives.
Yeah, and another beautiful thing is it's peaceful.
Exactly. It's a weapon of peace. I completely agree.
This is a transition where it could be peaceful. We don't have to pick up arms. We don't have to start a civil war. We don't have to overthrow the government. We can just simply transition to Bitcoin and starve the beast in a peaceful manner. Mm-hmm. And I think once people get that, then it's game over. It's off to the races. But the vast majority of people aren't there yet. So there's a lot of work still to be done.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Well, Dr. Reed, thank you so much for coming on this episode. It's been great to speak with you. A lot of good stuff, very encouraging. So share with the people where they can find you.
You can find me on X at FarmDBTC, PharmDBTC. And I'm also in a few groups on Telegram, kind of littered around. So, but yeah, mainly on X is where you can find me.
All right, go check him out, give him a follow, and until next time, grace and peace. Your family, your nation, and your world needs strong men. The devil wants men weak, emasculated, and addicted to porn. This is why I designed the Slaying the Beast course to help men take back the dominion porn stole from them. This course will help you discover your identity as God's image, how porn leverages and twists that against you, and how with God's help you can turn the tables on the beast and live free. There's also access to a Discord server where you can have fellowship with others in the fight. You do not have to wait any longer to conquer this beast once and for all. Go to lifegiverchurch.net to get started today.